Hello and welcome to another episode of Breaking the Blocks. I'm your host, Rachel Pearman. If you're watching this content on YouTube, I would absolutely love it if you enjoy the content, you could give it a little thumbs up. It's just down there. Just hit the thumbs up. It helps me to get the content out there into the algorithm, and you never know, somebody else might enjoy this interview as much as you do. Of course, I would love to have you as a subscriber. Come and be part of the gang. And if you hit the notify bell, then you will be notified when I put live content onto the channel. So today I am interviewing quilter Nicholas Ball. You all know him from his Instagram feed as Quilts from the Attic. Now, although if you follow his Instagram account, you will know his work very well because he puts lots of beautiful pictures up there and he is a fantastically talented quilter. But he doesn't really tell us a lot about himself. Now, I know a little bit more about him, but I thought I would try and delve a little bit into the psyche of Nicholas Ball for you, lovely listener. So Nicholas today talked about his grandma, what kind of inspiration she was on his life, why he's terrified of driving, how he doesn't like his own impatience, and maybe some other areas where he could improve his life. So sit back, relax, and I hope you get to know a little bit more about the wonderfully talented improv quilter that is Nicholas Ball. Oh, lovely. Okay, well, Nicholas Ball is joining me in the studio today. Hello, lovely Nicholas.
Hello, lovely Rachel.
Well, no one would know, Nicholas, that we've just had about an hour and a half of technical issues, but thank goodness we're friends and you don't hold it against me. We're going to have a nice chat.
No, I would never hold a grudge, Rachel.
He says, crossing his fingers for those who are not watching on YouTube. Oh, well, it is lovely to have you here, Nicholas. I've been asking you for so long and you were like, no, I don't have any sad stories. I don't know what I'm going to say. And I said, we just want to hear you on the podcast because I'm sure there's something lurking in there somewhere, Nicholas.
In the depths, maybe, yes.
In the depths. But it is amazing to have you here because you are a very prolific quilter, certainly of the moment, although I can see it spreading out for many, many years. I can't wait to see you when you're like 86 and still at your sewing machine, Nicholas. But no, you are a brilliant, brilliant improv quilter for anybody who's listening. If you haven't seen Nicholas's work, you need to have a look because it is bold, it is colourful, it is fun, and it's also very clever. And Nicholas has been teaching with us here at Crafty Monkeys for some time. We've now developed a friendship, and so here we are today. But there is one big block that I know that you, Nicholas, have overcome, and that is you have just launched your book.
Yes.
Use an Ornament, which seems to have taken about 26 years to come to fruition.
Yes, I feel, as you said, 80 almost after having gone through that arduous task of releasing Use an Ornament. But yes, and for a while we didn't mention the B word at all, but now we can. It's here. It has been what has felt like an eternity. Yeah, definitely.
Yes. Well, before we get to that book and what that was like developing that book, and I know it has been difficult for you as well, so that would be interesting to hear. Let's talk about you, Nicholas, and your beginnings, because I know a lot of, Crafty Monkey people listen to this podcast. There'll be people as well who are just listening to it because they like hearing about people overcoming things. There will be people, I think, from Crafty Monkeys who don't know very much about Nicholas Ball. One thing I will say about you, Nicholas, actually is you are quite a private person, actually. There's a lot of quilters out there that put it all out there, or their personality really comes across in their social media. I feel for you, Nicholas, it's all about the quilting. The quilting comes across, but I don't think we see much of the Nicholas underneath. So let's try and delve into him a little bit more today. Tell me about how you started with all of this creative stuff.
Creative and creativity is a brilliant way to put it because it hasn't always been about quilting. So just looking at the broader spectrum of creativity, that's been part of my life for as long as I can remember. So my earliest memories of creativity come from both my dad and my grandmother. My grandmother wasn't a quilter herself, but she definitely imbued in me that love of creating with my hands. So she would teach me how to knit. We would do counted cross-stitch kits together. We would do embroidery. We had a little book that we would work through and look at all the different embroidery stitches. So it was very much a sort of learning on the job in and around that time where she would look after me before school or after school. A lot of the time spent with my grandmother was spent in creative endeavour. And then also my father, his background was wood machining and carpentry. So again, before school and after school, I would tag along to his workshop or to his place of work, and I would be fascinated by all these bits of wood and the smell of sawdust and the idea of sticking wood glue on my hands and peeling it off and just making little oddments out of wood. So I've always had this desire, this deep rooted desire to make things with my hands. And it wasn't until after I graduated from art school with my degree in photography that I thought I sort of stumbled upon quilting. The short version of the story being I went traveling to try and get my photography career to take off, and that never materialized. So I came back to the UK a little bit disillusioned, wanted something that was as far removed from photography as I could get, really. And I happened upon quilting. I'd seen quilts on various TV shows and films, and I'd always had this idea of wanting to make a patchwork quilt. So without any idea about what I was doing, I bought cheap fabric, a very cheap sewing machine, very questionable quality thread, the bluntest scissors that you could ever imagine, and just set about exploring patchwork from a very traditional standpoint at that time, learned from books, blogs, other quilters working at that time, and just very much got bitten by the bug. And that idea of general creativity very soon narrowed the focus into all about quilting. So it's something that I wake up thinking about, I go to bed thinking about quilting, and it has become such a major part of my life that now it's often difficult to separate the Nicholas Ball from the quilts from the attic because they're so intrinsically linked now. Yeah.
Do you have brothers and sisters, Nicholas? I've forgotten.
Yes, I have one younger brother. Yeah.
So, did your grandma work with both of you when she was doing all those lovely crafty things with you?
Yeah, well, I think to the best of her ability, she tried. I think, for my mum and my dad and my grandparents and generally my wider family, it was very clear from an early age that my brother and I are very different. Whereas I was very academic, he didn't really like school. Where I detested any sort of sport, he was very much enamoured with the football and the rugby that my mum loves and my dad loves. So he kind of took that from them. And similarly, my grandmother, she wasn't in any way sport orientated. So I think from an early age, she could see that trying to teach my brother how to thread a needle or, sew a chain stitch on a lovely piece of white linen wasn't really going to appeal to him. So I think it wasn't that she didn't want to or that perhaps she didn't try initially. It's just that my brother and I are so different. It was quite clear from the off that that wasn't going to be something that would interest him. And similarly, in that same vein, as much as my mum and dad tried to engage me in their weekly weekend watching of football, or we would go and watch my brother play football for his local team, and I was very much distracted on my Game Boy, perhaps, or reading a book whilst that football was going on. So we are very different, my brother and I think we have our very clear interest that there is hardly any overlap, really, with those interests.
You see, what's interesting to me, the reason I asked you that, Nicholas, is because I was getting this feeling from you that you were an only child. I'm an only child. My grandma was very crafty with me. I could imagine you with your grandma being the only child and being kind of quite isolated in your world. And yeah, I was picking that up from you. So then obviously that's why I asked you about your brothers and sisters. And it's really interesting, isn't it, that you've just talked about your brother and parents and that you were in a way quite not, I'm not saying isolated in terms of there was a bad relationship. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying obviously the interests were very different. And there were, your brother was very much like your parents, but you were this kind of black sheep in a way.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And as you said, not in any sort of or with any negative connotation. My brother did spend time with my grandmother and did things with her. And similarly, I spent time with my mum and dad and doing other things. Of course, my dad had a bit of creativity in his sort of woodworking things. But there was that alone time that I really did cherish with my grandmother when it did feel like I was, the only grandchild, the only one there. It was really myself, as far as I can remember, that she showed how to make a Victoria sponge and how to make gravy and how to plant bulbs and how to weed the flower beds and how to sow seeds. So we would do all of these things. And looking back at that time, like it was just her and I. of course, which wasn't the case. But there was that sense of, isolation is the wrong word, but sort of a security, if you like, a sort of a comfort in the knowing that she and I had this thing that somebody else or my sibling or my cousins didn't really share. So that was very precious, and those memories of creativity from an early age, all the way up to when she passed, we were still doing things together. As I progressed into adulthood, and those memories of that time are some of the happiest memories that I have.
She did manage to see your first book, or knew that the first book was being made, didn't she?
Yeah, so she passed away in January of 2019, and Inspiring Improv, my first book, was published in April. So she saw sort of a rough draft of it, and of course that book then was dedicated to her, and just to thank her really for the things that she instilled in me, the creativity that she shared with me, which I think at the time, probably I didn't realize how much of an impact it would actually have on me. I think certainly I wouldn't have gone into a textile-based career if it hadn't been for her, or part of her influence on me at an early age. I have a lot to thank her for, definitely.
And she must have been so proud of you.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, she wasn't a very emotional woman, my grandmother. She kind of played her cards close to her chest. I don't think I ever saw her cry. She was very stoic, but I do feel that, for all her grandchildren, not just me, whatever their endeavours were or their achievements or accomplishments, I think that she was proud of me. So that's a comfort to know.
Now that's interesting, you see, Nicholas. You see, I told you I was going to delve into the Nicholas Ball.
You've scratched that surface, haven't you? That hard exterior.
I knew there was a softie in there. No, this is interesting though, because this is what I feel about you. This is what I said at the beginning, and I know you very well. Our WhatsApp conversations, so we both said if ever our phones got out there, people would be like, "What?"
It would be like Watergate.
It would be like Watergate. You do have two sides to you, I feel. You have this persona, and you are, as I say, you don't bear your emotions out there. You don't talk about your personal feelings, or even quilters of today will often. I'm thinking about Chris English when he puts his political statements out there, and we know where he's coming from, and he puts it all over his Instagram, and he'll make write things underneath the pieces. And then you've got Zach Foster, who of course at the moment is talking about privilege, but you kind of leave it to the work, really. You go, no, this is the work. Are you aware you're doing that? Is that a choice on your behalf? Or is it just something within you that you're not very, as you were saying, like your grandma, very stoic, not very emotional on the outside?
I'm kind of a juxtaposition in the fact that I would consider myself emotional. I am an emotional person. I do sort of have knee-jerk reaction to things, and I do.
Oh, do you, Nicholas?
I do feel things quite deeply. But then, and of course, I appreciate the fact that people are vocalizing their thoughts and feelings against all sorts of things, injustices, political things, economical things, social things. As artists and as creatives, we have a platform that we can use to put those thoughts and feelings into pieces of work and pieces of art. That is something that I probably have yet to do. Would I, am I saying that I would never do that? No, absolutely not. I mean, as I said, I do have thoughts and feelings about certain things, but I think when I'm working particularly in quilting, a lot of my inspiration comes from, for want of a better word, a sort of harmless place. So it's nature, it's flowers, it's insects, it's fruits, it's landscapes, and it's that challenge of translating that into fabric and then into quilting that sort of appeals to me. So I want my pieces that I make to be representative of that. So probably that's the reason why you don't see a lot of sort of hard-hitting quilts, I guess, from me, is that I'm so comfortable in that idea of just creating something nice, for the want of another better word, that I at this moment in time don't really feel the need to do that. Now, I may, if something terrible were to happen. And that's what's interesting about use and ornament, is that I explore all of these reasons why quilts are made. the phrase use and ornament comes back to my grandmother. So as a child, I would spend time in her house, as I told you. I would be so curious about all of the things that she collected. She wasn't a hoarder, but she had a lot of stuff, like grandma's house, they have lots of stuff. And I was so curious and inquisitive, and I would say, what's this and what's that? And she would explain to me what it was. And there were some things I would question, and she would reply, that's neither use nor ornament, meaning that it's not pretty and it doesn't have a function really. And that phrase stuck with me for as long as I could remember. So when it came to writing this book, which at its very heart is about looking at quilts that are both functional, providers of warmth, bedding, home furnishings, but also that are used for political protest, to memorialize someone, to celebrate something, to say something. Those pieces of textile art can become both use and ornament. So it doesn't have to just fit into one bracket. And I feel that's kind of like me. At the moment, I'm just working on these lovely quilts that are inspired by flora and fauna. But maybe 5 months down the line, something may happen to me in which I feel very strongly about, and I'll put all of that energy, all of that feeling and emotion into a piece. So quilts have this duality. They can definitely be both, I think.
By the way, I did wonder where the title had come from, use and ornament. I was going to ask you where that had come from, but that's a great phrase. That's neither use nor ornament. I can just see your grandma saying that, the sort of thing my grandma would say.
Yeah.
So that's lovely. You just said there about, so I can't remember exactly what you said, but it was about not putting yourself into a bracket. Yeah, not putting yourself into a bracket at the moment. Because I believe that's your sort of comfort zone. That's you're in your comfort zone. You love your nature, your fauna, you produce work around that, or you're using bright colours. You know your comfort areas. So would it scare you to step outside that and do something completely not what people would expect from Quilts from the Attic from Nicholas Ball?
I don't think it would scare me. It would definitely be, as you said, stepping out of that comfort zone, away from the familiarity of things that you've made previously. And I actually experienced this whilst writing Use and Ornament, because it was written, all those decades ago, as we said. So 2020 was when I started it. And of course, everybody now knows that 2020 was COVID. Nobody can separate that year from that, that event. There's another quilt which is about the Black Lives Matter movement, because at the time George Floyd was killed. So all of that was brought to the fore. Of course, that's nothing new. People have been protesting Black Lives Matter movement for some time. So I was very much inspired to sort of look into that and see, how can I better myself? How can I improve? How can I use quilting as a way to show injustices in the world, show that things aren't always pretty. Going forward, I'm open to the idea of doing it more and more. I think it has to be something that resonates with me, something that I feel strongly about. So yeah, I'm open to it. I'm looking forward actually to sort of, it's always good to challenge yourself and move away from, as you said, outside of that box, outside of that bracket, and try things that are new to you, that challenge you, that scare you. As creatives, we want to be challenged. And I think that's why I have such an affinity for improv quilting and sharing improv quilting with people, is because it does challenge you. There's an improviser in everybody. You just have to sort of unlock that part of you that allows that creativity to escape and flourish. And whether that's, taking a scrap and sewing it together, whether that's reading my book, whether that's listening to this podcast, whether that's going on a Crafty Monkeys workshop with a teacher that you've not yet heard of or experienced, that could just be all you need to unlock that part of you. And as was in my case, I started improv after beginning very traditionally, and it was definitely a driving force, and it put me on a completely different path. And I'm here now talking to you, and we have classes and I have books and I travel the world, and it's all because I thought, right, I'm going to try and do a quilt that's not in this book or not on this blog post, or there's no specific instructions for. And that's what improv did for me. And I think that's something that we could all learn from. Of course, we're talking about craft and creativity and quilting specifically, but that could be anything. It could be anything that pushes you out of that zone of comfort that you've become so familiar with, and just see where it takes you. It could be very, very exciting.
I'm right onto saying that your first foray into your improv quilt journey was the leek, wasn't it? When you
That
saw
is
the
correct. Yes,
magazine.
Rachel.
Mm.
Yes.
And I was just going to say, Nicholas, when you were saying there about it could be any kind of creativity. So that could be someone opening up a cooking magazine, which is what you did, a recipe magazine, and they could paint that leek. They could pick up their watercolors. So that's the thing. It's finding that spark. So for you, let's talk about the leek, because not the one you just had. You opened up this magazine and you saw this leek. What was it that made you go, I'm going to make that into a quilt?
That is the $1,000,000 question. And I wish, you know, in hindsight, you look back at your life and, you know, moments of significance and you think, how did it happen? This was just a nondescript day, weekday, and I was just flicking through a magazine on my lunch break in work, and there was a recipe, as you said, for a leek tart. And the first reason I stopped was because I love leeks and I love tarts and anything with pastry. So I was like, I'm going to make this. This is delicious. And of course, being Welsh, anything with leeks, I know it's a bit of a stereotype, but I do actually like leeks. So I was reading through this recipe, and of course, there was a picture of the finished tart, all lovely and styled. And then there was a little sort of side shot of the ingredients that you need, and the leeks were there and they'd been sliced through. And of course, in leeks, you can see all those concentric layers. But I just thought that would look great in fabric. So I went home, just raided all of the greens that I had. And, you know, at that time, my fabric stash was very minimal, and just spent sort of a day and a half, really quite stressed, actually, Rachel, I have to say, making that leek block, because I had no instruction to follow. I didn't know what size to cut things, how to join them. So I just tried my hardest to replicate what I was seeing in the magazine in fabric. And I always tell people that it wasn't about creating a photorealistic version of the leek. It was just about taking that line, pattern, tone, and suggesting that in fabric. And that really was the very first time that I thought, wow, I love this freedom, this creativity. So that leek really did just sort of blow the doors wide open. And I became obsessed. You know, at that time I was running around, getting vegetables, cutting them open. And you've seen that what followed was the red cabbage and the tomato and the carrot. And then after that, there was a second vegetable patch quilt, which had like asparagus and pumpkin and red onion. So I was very much sort of inspired by an unusual source. You know, talk to anybody and you think, oh, what inspires you in quilting? I don't think a lot of people would say cabbages. You know, I think I am in the minority there, but it was just eye-opening for me. And I really, really, really love that freedom, that organic way of creating. It was so inspiring to be in that place. The sewing room was a mess. There was scraps everywhere. There was like rough sketches. The iron was on full blast. The steam was coming out of it. And I was sweating. And it was just amazing to be so immersed in that way of creating, rather than going, right, okay, step 4B, let's cut 6 rectangles, you know, which is it's great, you know, you get good results from doing that. And, you know, some people love the idea of following a traditional pattern. But for me, I found it quite soon after I began quilting, if I'm honest, quite stifling. Yeah, it can come from anywhere. So just be open to it and look around, and don't feel that you have to just only be inspired by traditionalism. You can be inspired by anything, and just grasp it, definitely.
You know, you were just talking there about being inspired by looking around. I mean, one thing I want to talk to you about, Nicholas, is your travels, because you lived in Paris for a while, didn't you?
Yes, yeah.
How long were you actually in Paris for?
So Paris came about after Barry and I graduated from university. Our 2 universities shared a student union, so that's sort of how we met. We both graduated and decided that we wanted to travel a little bit just before we came back and sort of, you know, got a job and became adults and all of that sort of stuff. So I very much wanted to use it as an opportunity to pursue the photography career that I really envisaged for myself at that time. Of course, my degree was in photography, just graduated, had all these ideas of being a famous fashion photographer, and I would shoot the cover of Vogue and Dazed magazine and all this stuff. But we ended up staying there for 2.5 years just in Paris because it was such an amazing place. And I just had great fun working in an Irish bar, which on the face of it doesn't sound very glamorous, but it was a real melting pot of characters. And of course, living in Paris, you get distracted by, you know, things like wine and cheese and culture and museums. So the Nicholas that went to Paris that was very focused on pursuing photography was soon sort of lost in the sort of boho Nicholas of just wandering around Paris, wanting to buy a secondhand typewriter and pretending I'm Hemingway or something. It was all very, glamorous. So the photography, needless to say, didn't really take off.
So, what did your travels teach you then? Because obviously, when you went there, as you said, you had these ideas of becoming a photographer, and then those dreams, those ideas didn't happen. I mean, did you find that? Did you go through a sort of a low period when it didn't work out as a photographer, or did you just kind of go, oh well, I'll move on?
Yeah, I think in the interest of complete honesty, I think the reason why the photography career didn't sort of materialize for me was because at the time I wasn't giving it 100%. I think I could have done a lot more. And I think I came back a little bit disillusioned, which is why I wanted to then pick up something that was so far removed from photography. So I think to answer your question, I was just like, well, that's it then. And of course, quilting was only supposed to be a stopgap. It wasn't supposed to be this thing that I would be doing 10, 12 years later.
I know you, I know our conversations. So I know there are things that get to you. And I know that, as you say, you have a very sensitive side. But what does make you emotional, Nicholas? What does is there anything that just, really can really get to you?
I'm a very impatient person. And I was actually teaching the other day, and I just introduced the class. It just came out to me, and I said, I am very impatient. And they kind of like, oh. And I immediately regretted saying that because I think they felt that I was impatient with them. And I was saying, you better do what I say or you won't be able to keep up. So I quickly had to sort of redact that and go, I'm impatient, but not with my students, just with myself. And you know this from the classes that we do together. If there's a quick way that I can get people or show people how to sew 6 units in half the time, then I'll share that with them because that is just how I work. I'm very frenetic. I like to be doing it quite quickly.
Is there a flip side to Nicholas that we don't see, or that you only show to the people closest to you? Because we see a very positive, happy, very hardworking person, Nicholas, that we all, as I say, we've all seen, we all know.
On the most part, yes, I am. But I would say that there is a side that I don't show, and I'm at times, not always, but at times, a little bit like a swan on water. So above the water, it's all very, poised, and oh yeah, I can get that done for you, and yes, here's this, the deadline. But underneath, there is sometimes an element of, legs paddling like crazy. And I do have days where I'm definitely overwhelmed. And, you and I have had conversations about this, about the burnout, the fact that it is very real. And I often sit there at night and my head is just doing somersaults. My brain is on overdrive and I think, have I taken on too much? But then I'll get up and I'll answer those emails and I'll send those images that people need for a class, or I'll send the footage, or I'll write the presentation, or whatever it is. I'll make the quilt, whatever it needs to be. So I don't show that side of myself a lot. I try not to show the panic, but it would be remiss of me if I said that the panic wasn't there, because of course it's there. It is, it's a block. It's a block there that I have to overcome. And I think how I do it is because a lot of the time I'm very aware of the fact that I've put myself in this situation. It's not like a day job, let's say, where you go to your office 9 till 5 and you have these expectations from your boss, you have deadlines to meet. You might not want to do them, but you kind of have to because it's your job and you need to pay your mortgage. But at the same time, you didn't really put yourself in that situation, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Whereas with the quilting, I've said yes to the teaching. I said yes to writing the book. Nobody's made me do these things. So although I do have days where I sit down and go, you know what, I just can't be bothered with any of this. It's all just too much. I know that I've sort of made this for myself. So I have to work through it. And that's something that I think people don't see, because let's face it, who would want to present themselves as struggling or failing? Everybody puts on a mask, and says, yeah, it's fine, absolutely fine. But I think just being open about it and saying to people, well, yes, I do have days where I don't want to do all of the things, or I do have days where I think I've taken on too much. It just takes the gloss off it, which I think is important, because in life, not everything is high gloss. It might look like it, and never before has that been more relevant than when we live in this social media fueled world. And as amazing as social media is, and as beneficial and useful as it is to me and what I do and what you do and what a lot of our listeners and will do, it's not reality. It's not, it's not real. There are always sort of troubles, I guess, behind the scenes, and I definitely have those. So there is another side to me. There is the side of me that panics and thinks, oh, I'm never going to get this done. Although it might look like I'm very, oh, I've written a book and now I'm going here to teach this and I've done this, and, you'll see me on Festival of Quilts, and it can seem all quite polished, but there's a lot of planning that goes into that. And there is a lot of times where I think I'm not going to be able to do this. But, you just pull yourself up and do the best you can. You just have to just do the best you can and just be open about it, have the conversations, let people know that, you do go through these things, because it just might be those words that help them to then realize, oh, well, I thought I was a complete failure because I forgot to send that email, or I was supposed to do this. And here is somebody that's, has a book and does quilting online, or teaches quilting online, or does presentations, and yet they're having the same things that I have. So, and that there's a sort of broader element to it. It's not just quilting. It could be anything in your life. If you feel that you are sort of perhaps struggling, there are always going to be people who on the face of it don't appear to be struggling who are. So just bear that in mind, and realize that you're not alone. There are always sort of like-minded people who are going through the same things as you. So yeah, that's I'd say the flip side of the Nicholas Ball coin, is that I do sometimes go and panic about these things.
Do you shut down then in those moments when you're overwhelmed? I mean, I know you've said there that you sort of take a step back and breathe, but I mean, also as well, you were saying other people tell you to do that. But are you able to do that for yourself? You feel that overwhelm. What do you do?
It's very difficult. I really find it's like I have an on-off button, so that I can turn off all of the gotta send this email, gotta do this, gotta photograph this, gotta sew this. It's like there's a switch that I can flick to turn that off. But most of the time, it's like I just can't reach it.
Because people expect a lot of you, don't they? I mean, I have, I've been like deadlines, and although I'm always very kind to Nicholas, I am always like, oh, don't worry about it, chill out till next week. But we've worked. I know you had a lot on at one point. For me, you were like, I have got 17 projects to do right now, and then you've got other things you work. How do you cope with those expectations then? Because as you were just saying, it's difficult with that switch off. That's where the overwhelm comes. If you cave into those expectations too much, it's like other people come before you. Do you think there's a sense of that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's definitely times where I give to other people more than I give to myself. Absolutely. 100% agree with that. And I think as people, we do need to definitely try as hard as we can to take time that is just for us. I think, as you said, we need to sometimes put ourselves first before the demands of everything else, just that we stay sane, because it's so easy to get overwhelmed. I think anxiety and the idea of being overwhelmed is nothing new. If you talk to people from 300 years ago, they probably would have said they get overwhelmed by certain things in their life. It's just that those things have shifted. But also as well, those things are so much at the fore now because of the way technology has changed, the fact that we have our phones and we have screens and we have constant streams of information and demands put on us, because people can just, I need that, thanks, and they just send it to you. Whereas before, they might have had to send you a letter by a pigeon or something. Do you know what I mean? So it would have taken longer. You get what I'm saying. So yeah, I think just what it boils down to is you need to be front and center of your own life, I think. So you have to learn to say no, and you have to take the time for yourself so that you have the reserves to give to other people, because burnout is real. And if you don't look after number one, then you won't have the energies to give to number two, three, four, five, six. It has to start with you, definitely.
Well, do you know, one of my proudest moments of you, Nicholas, was when I saw your post on Instagram. You made something and you wrote, I have been so overwhelmed and overburdened. I am doing this for myself. This is not for any.
Yes, yeah,
Mm. And
yeah.
do you know, I was so proud of you in that moment, because I know I'd been asking you for a lot and you were starting to say to me, no. And I felt like you were shutting down. And you and I always have a joke where I say, are we getting divorced on the WhatsApp? But, you know, I felt like you were withdrawing from me, and I was like, what's going on? And then I saw this post. And, you know, that's when I think maybe you could, which would help alleviate your overwhelm a little. Maybe do open up a little bit on occasion. Maybe we do see that more fragile side of Nicholas. Maybe we do see that soft underbelly a bit more. And I was really pleased for you that you'd said, I'm not doing anything today. I'm doing this for me today, and it's for me. And I thought that was so important, because I think that also helps other people as well. As you say, burnout is real. So by you saying, I have been burnt out, so today, yeah, I'm sewing, but I'm doing it for me. I think that was a great post, and a great thing to see from you. So perhaps it's just, so maybe you just need to learn to do. I'm not telling you what you need to learn. I'm saying you seem to be saying that you want to learn to do more of that, to give to yourself a bit more.
Yeah, I see so many things. Again, it's catch-22. You don't want to look at your phone, but then you look at your phone and see, oh, that's amazing. You see such inspiring work. And that was case in point, what you just mentioned. I'm a huge geek. So I love all sort of sci-fi and sort of old retro comics and cartoons and all of that stuff. And somebody had put a new FPP, foundation paper piecing pattern up on this sort of fandom site that I'm a member of a gremlin from the film Gremlins.
That was it.
And my initial reaction was, I would love to make that, but I just don't have the time. And it really did sort of strike a chord with me, that I just really wanted that quilt. And I'm not an FPP designer. I could never, my brain doesn't work in that way. I have dabbled in sort of sewing of FPP before, but when I saw that gremlin quilt, I just wanted to make it for me. And I thought, you know what? No, I'm going to do it. So I went and downloaded the pattern and printed it out. And I think a few days later, I made a little chart of fabric that I wanted to use. And I ordered the fabric and it came. And I was so excited to have this little thing that was just going to, and there was no expectation. I wasn't saying this will be done in a week. It might take a month, might take 3 years, who knows? But it was just going to be something that I could just chip away at in times of, stress, or when I just wanted that break. And you are right. Maybe that is something that I need to do more of, because absolutely that wasn't the first thing that I saw and gone, oh, I'd love to make that, but I don't have the time. And I think past me or previous me may have made excuses. But I think going forward, I should definitely make the time. I should just grasp those opportunities, and push everything else aside just for that 2 hour immersive creativity that is just for me.
I think you need to do that, Nicholas. And I certainly noticed a change in you after that. You sort of came back to being you again. And obviously it was because you were just feeling so overwhelmed.
Yeah.
I've said to you, I always see you as being super duper. You're one of the most professional people I've ever worked with, because you work to deadlines, you do things properly. It has to be proper. I mean, I remember with one of our first VIP videos, you hadn't put the microphone on. And I was like, don't worry, we can boost this out. No, I'm going to do it all again. And then the microphone outtakes were very funny. But you are an absolute perfectionist. So where does that come from? Where does that have it? Because as I say, it's a step above. I have to do this right. Some people will go, well, I've done my best. But you go, no, I've done my best, but I think I can do better. Where does that come from?
It's always been there. I remember being as a child, in school, you have to do, tasks, particularly creative things. So I have fond memories of, you had to make models of something, or you had to design a poster to advertise something. And there were times when you would be forced into group work. You'd have to work with a couple of your fellow students. And I hated that because I then could not control the collaborative effort, because I could do my best and what I considered was my, you know, perfection. And then other people in my group might just, as you say, that'll do. It'll have to do that. That's what I've done. So it was always difficult for me being in school, working in a group setting. So I still have that sense of wanting it to be perfect. But when you work in an improv way, that perfection changes its meaning for me. It's not about having those perfect points and everything meeting, because a lot of the time you don't want that. You want to have this mismatch and this sort of spontaneous, organic looking piece. So that perfection now, I liken it to knowing that I have done as much as I possibly can in that moment on that piece. Looking at it afterwards, a day or two, a month or so, and I see things, sure, I see things and I think, oh, I would have done that better. But in that moment, when I was making it, it was perfect for me at that time. And I want to stress that this isn't from any sort of external pressure, people going, oh, that's not that good, you could have done better. It's all me. It's all me looking at it and going, I wish I moved that triangle just up a little bit because it's too close to that triangle of a similar colour, or something stupid like that. And it's always tiny things. It's never, any big, bold thing. It's always the little things that you sort of focus in on. But I don't think that idea of perfection and what it means to me today in my creative practice is ever going to go away. I think it's always going to be there, definitely.
Yeah, which in a way is good, because you do produce fantastic work.
It keeps you to a standard, doesn't it? It keeps you wanting to, as we said, do better. So having that, that idea of wanting to do better and perfection in whatever way it means for you, I think is a positive. As I said, it's sort of like a curse and a blessing.
And you like to be challenged, though, don't you, Nicholas? I mean, I think there are some people who don't want that challenge, but I think actually that drives you on. I think you like a challenge, because it's like when I came to you and said, let's do the VIP club for a year, and you were like, oh, let me think about it. But I think from your perspective, it was maybe one of the reasons, apart from, of course, absolutely loving me, Nicholas.
Of course.
But I think one of the reasons that you jumped in was because you thought, actually, this is going to be a great challenge. I haven't done this before. It is going to be a lot of work, but also I'm going to learn through the process. So I think that's what got you. That's why you did it. It was that challenge. Well, talking about challenging yourself, can we just talk about the B word now?
We can. It's not a naughty or dirty word anymore, Rachel. It's absolutely fine.
The book. The book. And by the time this podcast goes out, it definitely is going to be available everywhere. So it has been a long process. Now, you've had your first book out already. So was this a more difficult book to produce than the first? Or was it that there were just outside issues beyond your control that meant that it took a lot longer than you had hoped for? What happened in the journey of this book? Because it did seem to take a very long time, and I know at times you're very frustrated with it. So how was it writing it compared to the first experience?
Yes, it was very different. It was an experience which I had assured myself I would never have again. So in hindsight, Inspiring Improv was a breeze compared to Use and Ornament, but only in hindsight, not at the time. So when I signed the contract for Inspiring Improv, I had 6 months to make 12 quilts. At the time, felt like an impossible task. Of course, making the quilts, writing the book, sending the quilts for photography. But it all seemed to happen very quickly. Compare that to Use and Ornament, which has been sort of part of my life now since 2020. We're now, 2024, so we're talking 4 years. Whereas Inspiring Improv was sort of a little bit about my process, about my way of working, a little bit about who I am as a quilter, and then here are some lovely techniques and here are some quilt examples for you to put those techniques into practice. Use and Ornament, I call it sort of part history book, part craft book. Because of course there are new techniques for people to learn. This then involved research. It involved fact. and looking at examples that weren't made by me, both historical examples and from people working in an improvised way today, contemporaries of mine. So Joe Avery, Russell Barrett, Zach Foster, Heidi Parks, the list goes on and on. So there was that element of this needs to be correct. What I'm saying here is not just my words. That was quite daunting for me, having to sort of do all of that, but I sort of nailed down and did it. And I likened it to the sort of that second album syndrome that you sometimes hear musicians talk about, because people had been so warm and sort of friendly and really congratulatory about inspiring improv. They would come up to me and say, "Oh, it really helped me out of a creative block." Even now, I'm very much in a place of being both excited that whole 4-year long journey is almost at an end, but also slightly nervous because of the things that we've mentioned, the fact that it is slightly different, the fact that there is a historical element to it. I am pleased with the end product. I am pleased that it is the end now, and I can now sort of just release it, as it were, and it's out of my hands then. If people don't like it, they don't like it. I can't change what I've written. I can't change the content. It is now forever sort of as it is. And hopefully, now that you've bought this book or you've taken a class with me, you're going to continue to add to this rich story.
My only criticism of the book is I'm not in it. I mean, I was waiting for the second print run to hope that there would be an edition.
Yeah, second print run, amend. Can we add this in? But Rachel, you must realise that, as we said, 2020 was when the vast bulk of the text was done. And you and I were we were just names to each other, not even names to each other. We didn't know of each other then.
No,
so
I'm sure I would have been in it.
There's maybe always the second edition.
Well, yes, or maybe you should write another book about, I don't know, just great friendship, and then you can put me in there. Here are my great friends.
Rachel and Nicholas, the life and times.
Oh, come on. I can see it. What has been your biggest learning to date? Has anything happened to you where you've gone, oh, I've really learned that lesson? Maybe it's just this burnout thing, and you made that gremlin. Maybe that was a learning point.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely was a learning point. And I would also say, obviously, the making of the leek block was, again, a significant moment because of everything that came from it. But I think also just building on the skills as well. So the butterfly quilt, for example, that I designed for the VIP for this year and last year, again, that pushed me. I was learning things about myself as a quilter that I didn't know I was capable of. Of course, I worked in improv for quite a long time, but that butterfly quilt really did challenge me as a designer and as a teacher, putting it all together and creating content or creating instructions that people could follow. So that was a fine balance. And I was, I will say, I was very proud with that quilt and the fact that we put together such a interesting, in-depth body of work, which people, I think, will and have, they've said it themselves, taken a lot from. So I think those moments, those light bulb moments are definitely ones that will stick with me and have significance, I think.
And on a final note then, Nicholas, I always ask at the end, what is your motto for life? Do you have a motto, a phrase, some words?
I think what it boils down to fundamentally is sort of just do you, I guess. That's what I try to do. There isn't one right way to be anything. And if you're inspired by things that are unusual or outside of the box or beyond what you thought you might be inspired by, absolutely just grasp it and run with it and see where it takes you. And the worst thing is that it takes you to a dead end, but guarantee you would have learned something along the way getting to that dead end. And then you just turn around, you go back, and you take another path. So I would say that's my motto. Just be fearless and do you, and just see where it takes you. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think also, as a final note, Nicholas, I think you need to follow your motto and do you. So when you're feeling that overwhelm, do you, be you, allow yourself to give yourself time.
Yeah, absolutely. Words Perfect. To live by, definitely.
Yeah. Well, I wish you much luck with the book. Now it's finally out.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to seeing it and finally saying to people, yes, you can now buy it. Here's where it's available. I'll put all the details. Yes, but I'll put all the details of that below in the post, of course. So people can, if they listen to this podcast, go and buy it or have a look at it. But yeah, thank you so much for letting me delve a little bit deeper into Mr. Nicholas Ball.
You are very welcome. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes. And I should say, because you lived in Paris, let's just test out the French here, Nicholas. Je suis enchantée d'avoir fait votre connaissance.
Oh, merci beaucoup, madame.
Madame, not mademoiselle, which
Mademoiselle.
Is
Désolé,
the young one. Is that the young
mademoiselle.
one? We got it right. All right. Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you, Rachel.
Just before you go, lovely listener, can I ask you a favour? If you have a friend who you think would enjoy listening to this podcast, would you mind please telling them about it? It helps me to spread the word, and you never know, they might get a life lesson out of it, or at the very least, just have a lovely 40 minutes of relaxing time for themselves. The second thing to say is that if you have enjoyed this, it would really help me if you would give me a little quick like or a comment, especially if you're listening on one of the podcast platforms. It just means that when anybody lands on the page, they can see that people have reviewed it, they've liked it, enjoyed it, and got something out of it. So if you wouldn't mind leaving me a review, that would be amazing. And the final thing to say is that if you are a business and you're thinking, how do I get my message out there? Well, you could do it on this podcast. All you have to do is reach out to me, Rachel@breakingtheblocks.com. The details are below in the box. Thank you so much to everybody who's subscribing, listening, liking, leaving comments, and just generally enjoying the podcast.